As many of you all know, I'm originally from North Carolina. North Carolina is the home of NASCAR. Now, there was very popular, I've actually never been to a race. Maybe that was a shock, but I've never been to one. Even though we had in Hickory, we had the Hickory Motor Speedway. It's kind of another league below the big NASCAR races, but that was one of the landmarks on the south side of town was the Hickory Motor Speedway. Had friends that went, a lot of tales of things that happened there, and that's great. I mean, NASCAR, there's a lot about that culture I admire, respect, things I could share, good things I could share about that. So what I'm about to say is not a put down. It's just an observation shared within North Carolina, okay? So this is the home folks talking. And saying, why do you go, one of the reasons you go to a NASCAR race. You know there's going to be a wreck, and you just want to see it. Okay? A controlled environment, and rarely has anybody ever heard. Wanted to see a wreck. And looking at this section in the life of David, I just felt like I'm at a NASCAR race. And there's a big wreck coming, and then the wreck hits. Now, some of the other stories, I've said, if you went back to the chapter of Scripture, in about 5 minutes, you could have it knocked out if you want the whole story. This is a little more involved. You have to go chapters 13 through 18, maybe take about 20, 30 minutes to kind of read and absorb it all, and I'm only doing the highlights of this section. This is a very, very dark time in the life of David. I warned y'all last week. We had David and Bathsheba. I said it's going to get worse. Next week it's going to get better, so please come back next week, okay? It will get better. Our story begins in 2 Samuel 13. And David has several wives. He has children by these different wives. Amnon is the oldest, and Absalom, I believe, is his fourth son. And Absalom has at least one sister named Tamar. Now, Amnon, the oldest, develops a crush on her. I know it's gross. One thing to keep in mind, I think often the children were kept in separate households. They didn't see each other often. In Egypt, this sort of practice went on. So it's not alien, if you kind of know what's... And the caravans go through Judah and Israel, and it goes through that area. So we've been aware of that. It's gross, I know, but it's not like something he invented. And so he gets this crush on her. And one of the devious friend says, okay, here's what you do. Act like you're sick. Your father's going to come in, he kind of gives you anything you want anyway. He's going to come in and just say, oh, what can I do for you, buddy? And, oh, could you have my sister serve me? Well, sure. And so David is just fooled into this as well. And Tamar initially is thinking, oh, bless his heart, he wants, he's probably more than happy to help him. And so she goes in, just then, and gets ready to get hot chicken soup or whatever. Well, he makes him pass at her. And she lets me know right off the bat, this is not how we do things in Israel. I don't care how they're doing things in Egypt. This is the Lord's land, and we don't do this thing here. However, he takes advantage of her. She is hurt. She is crushed. And after the moment, he sends her away with contempt. Again, how degrading. Absalom, her full brother, takes her into his house, so she will not be cast out completely. She has a place to stay and someone to care for her. King David hears of this. He becomes angry, but he will not punish his son. He loves him so much. Sadly to say, we often enable a lot of behavior and indulge a lot of behavior in the name of love. Absalom hates his half-brother, and for 2 years it's boiling beneath the surface. It says he did not speak to him. It's not clear. Did it mean we are not on speaking terms? I will ignore you, act like you don't even exist? Or does it mean they don't speak of what happened? Acts like I don't know what happened. And it's a bit vague. It's the text says it's a bit vague which direction it goes. But 2 years later, Absalom throws a party for all of his half-brothers and gets David to support it, and have everybody come, even have old Amnon come. And Amnon is there, and Absalom tells his servants, okay, during the party, when he's had maybe one too many, go strike him down at that point. It's my order, okay? You'll be doing it, but it's my order. Don't worry. It's my stuff. And he is killed. Amnon is killed. David is furious. Absalom flees, and for 3 years he is away. David mourns his oldest son. He grieves and begins to long again for Absalom, another indulged son. Now enter Joab. Now again, as I mentioned last week, he's a shady character. You get a whole study on him and the different things that he does during the reign of David. However, for all of his shadiness, he has some honest practicality about politics, about the situation. There is a power vacuum. The king is getting older. His heir apparent is not there. Absalom, who kind of everybody saw as being the next in line, is absent. This is not good. The kingdom needs to have an heir around. And so he sets up a situation. So in chapter 14, he has a woman to come in and she spins a tale, and essentially she tricks David into inviting Absalom back to the royal compound. 5 years have passed since the outrage with Tamar, and Absalom has had 5 years to get really mad. He returns, he has quarters to live, but he is not received at court. He's allowed, let's just say he's allowed in the royal compound, but he's not in the presence of his father. 2 more years pass, so it's 7 years since that first incident. You can get really angry and really bitter at that time, over that time. Absalom sets Joab's barley field on fire. Joab's like, hey, what's with you? And Absalom is like, okay, now that I got your attention, get me in the presence of my father. Do what it takes. So we're kind of getting a hint of Absalom, at least at this point in life. And so Joab arranges for an official reconciliation. But it seems to be clear that there's no real restoration. If he's angry, he's angry. They've not dealt with it. There's no forgiveness. There's nothing been done for the relationship there. It's only just 1 inch further along, with no hint that it will go any further. And the kingdom is drifting out of control. David has just not been David now for years. 4 more years pass. Now, over this time, Absalom would sit at the city gates. That's where people would come in if they had a case to be settled by the king. That's what they would do. And he says things, I think you're right. And if I were king, I'd rule in your favor. I don't know if the king should even show up today. Do you even want to bother coming? You know, if I were king, I would be there 9 to 5. I would be there. 4 years of a whispering campaign that turns people against David, thinking David just hasn't got what it takes anymore. In chapter 15, there is an open revolt. It is ugly, it is blunt, it's just difficult to read. Absalom shows cunning and deceit. In fact, when you look at his life, about the only good thing you can say about him is he was good to his sister. Reminds me of somebody I knew who could be rather difficult to deal with. And I had a conversation with a third person about this fellow, and I said, well, he's good to his wife. And her first husband was a real jerk. And he's been really good to her. So we can find something good to say there. Absalom is just, he's just trouble twisted at this point. David has to flee. In our Psalm 3 that you see in your bulletin, those were the words attributed to him while he fled from Absalom. David does have a network of support, and we see that begin to develop in their battles and plots and counterplots. In the end, Absalom loses, and fleeing with his long hair, he is caught in a tree, and Joab kills him. And David weeps. His son is dead, and kid's dead. There is no chance of any reconciliation now. And then we come to our reading today. Now, Joab, for all his faults, he is realistic, he is practical. And he basically goes to David and says, look, men have risked their lives for you. They could have gone over to Absalom. That was the easy thing to do. Yet they busted themselves for you. And you have turned their well-deserved celebration into a case of shame. Now go out, be a king, go thank them for what they did. And David does just that. Each week as we have visited these episodes in the life of David, I've always taken us back to Doran, that little town in East Texas. And Tom, who owns the best body shop and auto repair shop in 5 counties. He hears this story in variations. He has heard this story before in Doran and other communities in the surrounding area. And he thinks of Gus. I talked about Gus last week. Who just had made some poor decisions. It was affecting his home life. It was affecting his work life. And he did get back on track. He had an older man confront him and just say, what are you doing? Where's the Gus that we used to know? And he got things back together. However, he and his wife had 4 children. And it was never the same with the older 2. They saw the poor things that he had done. And yes, he eventually got back on track and tried to make up. But to a degree, he has lost their hearts. That decision has impacted the relationship with the older 2. He was able to fix things up pretty good with the younger 2, but not the older 2. And his marriage is back together. It's better than some thought it would ever be, even if it would make it. But it's not 100%. And there is a region of his wife's heart that he will never go to again. At work, he lost the respect of co-workers on his team, and he's never regained it. Now, he got back on track. He got back to being the old Gus. And those who have come to work since then know him at his best. He's got their respect. If there's a group there, it'll never be the same. Tom hears this story and he thinks of Gus and the pain in his life. He thinks of others who have had situations. There's some parallels in their lives. See, Tom knows back in the church, it's one of those buildings that have been added on over time. There are a lot of nooks and crannies. He knows about the back basement. There's a bathroom. No one goes there on Sunday. After church, he went straight back there. And he had a good cry because he knows nobody would see him as he thought of those lives and what had happened. In this long storyline, we do see human examples of God's grace. Now, a section that was not read, you'd have to go back and see it, but as David flees, along the way, there's somebody that taunts him, but somebody else, a recent recruit, Ittai the Gittite, joins up and says, I will help out. Now this man, Ittai, he had only recently left his homeland. He has nothing to gain and everything to lose by sticking with David, because at this point it looks like David is last month's news. And David even says, you only came yesterday, go to Absalom. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow. Essentially he says that. But Ittai casts his lot with the Lord's chosen king.